things I could. I've got a list of them here that this government has overseen, from David Cameron's green crap through to Rishi Sunak's giveaway tax breaks for big oil and opening up of new oil fields, granting new licenses. We know that we're going in the wrong direction. And we also know, under first past the post, what we see time and time again is around about 1 million swing voters, this time so-called in the red wall, who get to dominate the political issues. What their issues are or what the politicians tell them and the media tell them the issues that are important, whether it's boat people or trans rights or whatever that may be, becomes the kind of the area where the mainstream, the two big political parties, decide that the general election will be fought on. And that means that that's to the detriment of many other issues. We know 8 out of 10 people in this country think that the climate crisis is something in the top 3 of their concerns about where we as a country and what we as a country are doing about the future. Now, I will very quickly come to the Labour Party, being the Labour Speaker. The Labour Party has made progress on this. It's made progress on this, as you know, 2 years in a row. We've now voted for PR, both the affiliates and the members. They're leading the drive on this. I'm really pleased that they're doing that. Gordon Brown's now come out with his Brown Commission. I hope we can discuss that a little bit later tonight. I will say it's worth the paper it's printed on just, but let's unpack that and talk a bit more about that.
Yeah.
And although it makes no mention whatsoever of how a new constitution would enshrine constitutional obligations towards the climate crisis and tackling that and decarbonisation. So I think there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Everyone wonderfully on time. Thank you so much. Okay. So I'm very encouraged to hear you think there's more people in the Labour Party coming out for PR, and good to talk about that a bit more. And yeah, it's always just so ridiculous to hear about the situation with the Lords being more democratic than the Commons, but it is the case. And the hereditary monarch, I do want to kind of give one word of hope at this point. A very long time ago, decades ago, now King Charles, at the time Prince Charles, did express his support for proportional representation publicly. So yeah, it would be great to get him on side. So, you know, if anyone knows him or someone who knows him, let's start getting the message through that we'd like his support on this campaign. Yeah, just briefly to respond to the point about PR is not a silver bullet or a panacea. No, it's not. But nothing is. And nothing else is referred to in that way. Nobody else says, oh, you know, X isn't a silver bullet or a panacea. It's always PR. And it's kind of because they're grasping at something to say that's it's not that great, you know, it doesn't fix everything. No, but it fixes a lot of things, and it would really enable us to take faster climate action. So yeah, let's knock the balls in different directions, and let's get some questions coming in. I'm going to use Chair's prerogative to ask the first question. Then we'll be taking questions both from the audience and in the room and those online, which Sally's going to be helping with. So the first one on the Labour topic, with Labour continuing to lead in the polls, how can we get Sir Keir Starmer and his advisers to see that PR is a priority?
Well, so, how do you... I don't know I have the answer to that. Look, I think you need to understand why they ignore the will of... Which is, I can't recall when an issue has been debated and voted on 2 separate occasions, back to back at conference. So this is clearly something that isn't going to go away. Keir Starmer was at the height of his political power, as was at the last conference, and was unable to make this go away. So members understand that this is more than just another policy. This is something that is integral to the broken politics, of which the Labour Party tacitly accepted under the Brown Commission is a doorstep issue, and that there has been a breakdown of trust with the British people, but then didn't go on to make any comment except for first past the post in the context of we will bring that back for mayors. Well, the argument then goes, well, if it's good enough for mayors, why isn't it good enough for other bodies that would be elected? PR, of course. So in terms of why, I think you need to understand, and obviously I'm on thin ice here in the current climate within my party, but I'm going to be really honest and say that the Labour Party isn't a democracy in the way that a democratic institution in the way that most members understand it. Because if the sovereign body of the Labour Party can twice tell the leadership of our party, that they want PR as a policy, and then it doesn't materialise as something that the leadership say that they will do, then frankly, that isn't really a democratic structure, and not in the sense that we would understand it. So I think the first thing is, if they're not going to listen to the party conference 2 years in a row, then you have to ask yourself why. And there's a really simple reason. Something called, you've probably heard of it, Labourism, which is this notion that Labour must govern alone, it must pull the levers on its own, it must have power on its own, even if that means they win 3 times less than the Tories, as they did in the 20th century. There's a two-place podium, and they want to be on that second-place podium as more often than they are in the first-place position, rather than share power with other political traditions and parties. And I think that's very sad, but this is the key thing. PR is basically a democratic suppository. It's not quite as eloquent as your term, but it would be a democratic suppository for both the Labour Party, I think all political parties, and the British polity. And what I think the leaderships of both the Conservatives and Labour fear is the fact that this suppository would diminish their power. Because if you think about it, and I will finish on this point, first past the post, as we already established, creates this kind of small percentage of people in a handful of key constituencies who basically, I'm not going to say manipulated, but it means that the full force of the media, of those who control much of the media, of those who have political agendas, who pull levers and have power in our society, are able to focus and distract on a very small number of people, to the detriment of many other people in that political system. That requires the Labour Party and the Conservative Party to have something called discipline, message discipline, voting discipline. And if you take that away so that every seat doesn't become no seat is a safe seat, and you take away that power from that small number of swing voters and push it out to the many, then you lose one of the raison d'etres for such tight control of your party. So this is a control issue. And I think that those that understand the principles of democracy, and Keir Starmer and others understand why PR is a good thing. In fact, I think they were supportive. But they also understand it's about losing control, and that's what they don't want.
Thank you very much, Clive. So I'd like to open up to questions from the floor. So do put your hands up if you've got a question that you want to ask. And I think let's take 3 at a time, and then we can put them to whichever panellists would like to answer them. Just on the topic of Labour, whilst people are putting their hands up, if you're not already on the mailing list for our allies at Labour for a New Democracy and you're a Labour member, please do sign up with them because they're running a fantastic campaign. They've led this drive to have the big votes at conference these last 2 years. So there's lots of work happening at the moment. Do get involved. OK, so I think the first hand up and the microphone is here. What would you like to ask?
Thank you very much indeed. Am I switched on?
Yep.
Yes. Just a quick observation on the last answer. As democracy is being eroded in this country quite rapidly, I think my wager is that if the Labour government doesn't go the next time round for proportional representation and it then loses the following election, it will never be elected again. That's just an observation. My question is that in this country at the moment, I think about 80% of households use gas as a method of heating. We won't meet net zero if we continue to use gas as a method of central heating. What can the panel suggest we do about this?
Thank you. And Stephen.
Sorry, Millicent.
Oh, Millicent's got one already? Yeah, thank you.
Question for all 3 of the party political members of the panel, and that is, do you think that if we had PR, your parties would fracture?
Thank you. And then the person, thank you.
Natalie mentioned the BBC not talking about climate change, but how do you engage with the media as a whole, all aspects of the media, to understand the link between PR and climate change, or talk about PR full stop?
Great questions. Thank you very much. So over to the panel. Who would like to take one first? You're looking. Yes.
I don't mind doing the gas one.
Go ahead.
Energy efficiency for years was my kind of pet kind of geeky topic, but it does actually link straight back to proportional representation, because the answer to the question is, how do we get people off gas? Well, we engage in a massive program of energy efficiency, and we start to install heat pumps in huge numbers. Well, Why is that made more difficult under proportional representation? I think it's partly because of what Clive said, which is the drive towards focused sites really means that these kind of diffuse problems, like cold homes, like fuel poverty, get much less attention than those kind of solutions to climate change where you have a specific set of parliamentarians can lobby because they will bring massive numbers of jobs to a particular area. So you can compare the attention that we see for something like offshore wind, which is a great thing, absolutely support offshore wind, but it's locatable in a place where there will be jobs and implications for somewhere like Hull, whereas a diffuse problem often clustered in areas that might have safe seats. I mean, certainly with air pollution, you know that problem is stacked up in places like central London. I live in South London. You have super majorities all over central London. Well, where's the political impetus to deal with that, compared with something which is going to generate, say, jobs for the automotive industry with moving to EVs? So I think first past the post has a kind of pernicious impact on what climate solutions we give focus to and which climate solutions we don't. And partly I think that is part of the reason why we've seen this awful lack of attention on energy efficiency, because it does impact the poorest in our society, but it is diffuse all over the place, but it still kills. So I think there is a direct loop through to first past the post mitigating against those kind of solutions.
Thank you very much. The next question on PR fracturing parties. Natalie, would you like to take that one?
Yes, I mean that's a really interesting question. I love being asked questions I've never been asked before, and that's a really interesting one. I don't think it would, because the Green Party, indeed, what my book, Small Advert, Change Everything, Everyday Common Sense Politics for the Age of Shocks, with Unbound, so you can pre-buy your copy, and I'm to 60% funded. Okay, I've done my advert now. What it says is there is a complete green political philosophy, which greenism, it's interesting we don't have a word for this. If you look around the world, green political parties pretty well everywhere sit in the same political space. And they sit, pretty far down on the traditional left wing of the spectrum. And I think there's a reason for that, which is that we know that you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. We have to live within planetary boundaries. Britain uses, collectively, we all use the resource of 3 planets every year. We've only got 1 planet. But if you just say take the society now and say, right, everyone cut back by 2/3, literally a lot of people end up dead. So to be a green, you have to be profoundly redistributive from anywhere our current society is. And that puts us pretty far on the left in the current political spectrum. It's impossible, I would say, to have a philosophically coherent position as a right-wing green, because you can't solve the 3-planet problem as a right-wing green, which is not to say some people don't call themselves that, but it just does not philosophically hang together. So I don't think that it would split the Green Party. I was just sitting here thinking something I've never thought before. I mean, I do sometimes think in all kinds of ways, what would we want Britain to look like in the 3rd term of a Green government? So the Tories have blown themselves apart. There's Labour and Green, and we're going to get PR, and so that will fix itself. But anyway, let's leave it in the current system for a second. What does it look like in a 3rd term of a Green government? And if we've actually got a 1-planet living society and Greens are the absolute dominant political force, then maybe we would find things to argue internally ourselves. But it's such a different frame, and I've got so many things to worry about. And, I'm old enough to not really worry about that one. Leave that to someone else.
Okay. So let's finally, if you have to take the question on media and the link between PR and climate crisis.
I would rather talk about the fracture of party, because that really interests me, and I probably have more to say that is consequential rather than just blabbering on as politicians can.
Yes.
I mean, it does actually beg the question. We're so acclimatised, or we've become so used to actually wondering, is this in the interest of the party? Why parties want to be in power? Assuming all that, actually, what is the point of parties? That our politics should surely be actually a matter of enabling, putting into effect values. I mean, obviously, this is something which we actually have quite existential conversations within Plaid Cymru about what do we exist to bring about. But actually, if people go into politics because they have certain values and there are certain actions which they want to see realised, then how we actually see that coming forward is really, really important. And this duality of the 2-party system and the no cracks for the light to come through, Now, again, this is what I quite admire with the First Minister of Wales, is he's actually realised that to safeguard democracy and then give the possibility of issues-driven politics to come to the fore, you have to crack some of the powers that Labour, which is probably, well, is the most successful party in Wales for the last 100 years in representation, you have to actually give the means there for that to change, because that will be healthier and it will enable climate change and other issues for us in our politics to be able to move much more swiftly towards them, rather than putting what we are seeing very much now in Westminster is a party talking to itself to maintain in power.
Thank you. It's also worth mentioning that when New Zealand moved from first past the post to proportional representation, the Labour Party didn't split, as people often assume that the Labour Party here would split if we had it. So it's not necessarily that way. And of course, they now have a majority, but are choosing to work with the other parties anyway, because they learnt in the last Parliament that actually that works better. I'm going to answer briefly the question about making the link between PR and climate crisis in the media, and I think more broadly with the public. I think it's really about having an unstoppable grassroots movement, which is, of course, what we work to create and you're all part of. We're going to be having a massive lobby on the 24th of May, so it's my turn for the shameless plug. So we'll be going to Parliament en masse and lobbying our MPs, so do come along and help make that link. If you care about the climate crisis, make that link clear to your MP. Sally, could we take some questions from you, please?
We have a question from Martin. How does the panel answer those critics of PR who say it is bound to lead to a nightmare situation as found in Israel, where minority parties with dangerous policies can set the agenda? And we have a question from Sarah. Given how long PR will take to achieve, how can we achieve cross-party strategy agreement on driving climate change to avoid new governments changing policy following elections?
Okay, who would like to take one of those?
I can probably mix in a bit of one of the last questions and the situation with Israel. And I think the first thing is you can look around the world and you can see countries which use PR, and you can also see countries which, frankly, you wouldn't want to follow down that particular path. Israel is one of them in terms of the direction of travel that they've gone politically. But I think you also have to look at a broader set of circumstances in that country. I think I don't have to go into the detail of the political situation in Israel with the occupation of 50 years and Palestine. And that is obviously going to, you speak to anyone, broadly centre-left in Israel, and they'll tell you that it has toxified Israeli politics. So that clearly is a function not just of the political voting system, but also of the political environment in which that country finds itself. I wonder what it would be like if they had a first-past-the-post system. It's something you can think to yourself about. Would it actually solve problems? I don't know. I don't think so, any more than the current system has. And I think the question about would political parties, including the Labour Party, would they break up with PR? I think it's a really interesting question. It came up when I was debating this around the country with different CLPs, and it's a question that came up really frequently, and I was really scared of it at first. But actually, the membership were way ahead of me, and they understood that actually simply being fearful of that particular outcome, which isn't, I think, depends partly on lots of factors, including the system that you go for, isn't a reason not to embrace something which is right and democratically astute. So that was the first thing, I'm way ahead. But secondly, I think, in terms of the kind of potential reshuffle that could take place, it's about a cultural change. And I think that's the key thing. And the way I kind of talk about this is I was sat next to a European Portuguese MEP, and she sat next to me at the Labour Party conference, and her phone text went, and she went, oh, fantastic news. The Spanish socialists are about to win outright in their general election. This is fantastic. And I was like, oh, that's great news. And then she went really quiet, pensive, and started tapping at her phone. And she said, no, actually, it's really bad news. I don't want them to win outright. If they win outright, they'll become hubristic and arrogant. I'd rather they were the biggest overall party, so they therefore worked with others, and they will have far better politics and a far better outcome. Yep. And I looked at her like that, and I went, that is so alien to the culture in my party. But I think what PR would do would open up the culture, and parties that would fall apart would be parties that didn't embrace that new working culture of collaboration and cooperation, which this is also about. It isn't just about the technocratic elements of a list system, STV or whatever. It's also about the culture of politics. And that is where I think parties